Good evening and welcome to the scheduled meeting of the Granville-Ziegler Village School District Board of Education. Would you please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for coming out here on a somewhat rainy week. Venturing out in the weather, we appreciate it. Would you please take the roll?
Mr. Jennings.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Dr. Cornwell.
Here.
Ms. Dean. Mr. Wolf. Here.
Now to the best part of our meeting.
Yes.
And I'm not referring to Mr. Brown speaking.
All right. So it is usually the best part of the evening where we get to commend several different groups, whether it's kids or staff members. But tonight we are recognizing two GES kindergarten teachers. So Mariah Gibbs and Janine Durham, come on up and stand here awkwardly as I talk. So this evening, after I stop talking, Mr. Bernath is going to talk a lot about the achievements of the school district. And what we know is that those achievements are not possible without high-quality teachers, period. And we know that in a lot of circumstances, the high school gets a lot of credit for the achievements of our students because that's the end of their journey. But I'm going to tell you tonight that it all starts here, okay? With two individuals that teach kindergarten. So Janine was nominated and received the Transcendia Excellence in Education Award, and Mariah Gibbs received the Jody Mantine Award from the Education Foundation. So when I say kindergarten is foundational, I mean it. Everything builds off of that experience. And what we have here in our foundational aspect of our school district is a level of excellence that's second to none. I've been in their classrooms. I know what they do. It honestly scares me more than calculus does. Because kindergartners, they throw at you just about anything possible that they can throw at you, and they have an energy level that is unparalleled. So on a day-to-day basis, the work that they do has to physically exhaust them. So I know that it takes a strong network from a family standpoint to support the work that you guys do as well. But on behalf of the Board of Education, the Granville students, parents, and community, we want to thank you and recognize you for your excellence in education and providing what I think is the exemplary foundation for our students. So congratulations, and we appreciate your service, so you get little gifts. So congratulations. We're going to have to take a picture. Tanya, yeah. Stand over here.
I did go to Ball State University photography camp when I
You
was
did?
high school.
Oh, boy, yeah.
Photography for my yearbook. All right, ready? 1, 2. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, Fred, let's take a photo.
Yes.
1, 2. Perfect.
And it's a race to see who gets it on social media. And even though it scares me to come into your classrooms, I enjoy it every single year. It's the highlight of my day because I love to hear all the things that come out of kindergartners' mouths. It's fantastic. So congratulations and well deserved, both of you. Thank you. So next we have our student report, Kristen Zainal. Now, everybody who was just here, you can leave. But if you want to stay for the student report, you can, because you'll have some audience. So Kristen Zainal is going to come and give a little report about the beginning of school at GHS.
Hello, I'm Kristen Zano. I'm a senior at Granville High School. I'm the student body president. And I just want to give you a little picture of how the school year is starting. And I just thank you, first of all, for the privilege to be able to come up here and to come visit you throughout the year and just give a report and give a student opinion. So a little bit about me. I play field hockey and lacrosse. I sing in the choir. I'm the Latin Club president, and I'm pretty much involved in everything else. So you can be sure that I'm giving an accurate picture of everything that's going on. So first of all, the sports this fall are kicking off great. Volleyball, football, soccer all have great seasons. And even if a sport is enjoying a great season, such as field hockey, we're still having fun, so that's good. And so theater-wise, the auditions for the theater program are last week, and the plays that we're preparing for are in the fall called 110 Stories, which is about 9/11, and in the winter it's called Beverly Hillbillies, which is it's like a comedy, so that'll be really funny. The music programs are all preparing for their fall concerts coming up, so band, orchestra, and choir are all putting in a lot of work for that. And the marching band, of course, is doing great, not only performing every Friday night, but also at various band competitions ranging from Ohio University to Jackson, Ohio. And then also, homecoming is the buzz of the school at the moment. That kicks off October 1st with the parade and bonfire. And then we have the football game versus Northbridge, and of course the dance. So that's all the extracurriculars going on at Granville High School, and I thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you, and I hope you have a great meeting.
Thank you. Great job.
And yes, you don't have to stay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That brings us right into staff reports.
So Mr. Bernath is going to get set up to talk about the local report card and the quality profile.
Not nearly as exciting as homecoming, I'm sorry. Okay, as everybody knows, our local report card came out last week along with our quality profile, so I'm going to give a brief overview of both and just the things that were encompassed in both of those. So the report card this year, the nice thing for once, there's not a whole lot of changes. The air tests are in year 3 for the state tests, math and ELA in grades 3 through 10. That ends with algebra 1 and geometry at the high school level. Sciences grades 5, 8, and biology. And then there is one slight change that we talked about last year. Social studies is just U.S. history and government now. The grades 4 and 6 social studies tests are no longer present. So you get the early fall time frame for the second year in a row. Remember that very first year we got like a spring release and then a fall release right after that, so it was like kind of back to back. We're back on a normal schedule from OE's perspective. And the 6 components that make up the report card have not changed. Achievement, K-3 literacy, progress, prepared for success, graduation rate, and gap closing. The one new thing this year is there is an overall grade. So they take the scores in all 6 of those components that school districts have, and you get an overall grade. Our overall grade this year, as you know, was an A. There were 28 A's out of 607 districts statewide, and it was pretty much a bell curve in terms of what that distribution looked like statewide on the state test. So this is our overview and then what we scored in each area. You'll notice that we have 4 A's, 1 area that's not rated, and a B in prepared for success. So what I want to do is just very quickly go through each of those, explain how we got those grades, answer any questions, maybe pull out some pieces of data that you don't really see in the report card unless you dig a little bit deeper. So the first one is the achievement component. And the achievement component is actually made of 2 different parts. It's the indicators met from all the test areas plus your performance index. Your performance index, very simply, is how well do your students do on each of the tests. Not just if they pass or not. That's what these indicator percentages over here measure. So the first part of this, there are 22 different tests, and then there are 2 non-test areas. One is the gifted indicator, which we've had right from the beginning. And this is a new indicator called chronic absenteeism. If your students miss more than 10% of the school year, you actually get a rating for that from the state because it's a significant part of achievement. And, that was sarcastic, sorry. And if you're below 12%, you meet that indicator. That indicator percentage is going to go down a little bit each year until it gets down to 5%. So right now, our chronic absentee measure was 7.9% of our population missed more than 10%. So if a student is ill and out of school, that counts against you. They go on a couple vacations with their family, that counts against you. They just decide to miss school for whatever reason, that counts against you. It all counts against you, whether it's excused or unexcused. But 10% is the threshold for that. We're well below the 12%. We'll have some work to do as that number gets smaller and smaller. So we met 23 of the 24 indicators. The indicators you have to reach 80% to pass. We did not meet 7th grade math again. We've talked about this every year, I think, that 7th grade math, we have a large percentage of our students that skip 7th grade math. So that N size is very small. They missed it by 2 students. So they're very upset by that, but their scores are still in the top 15% in the state in that particular subject area. So they're doing really well. It's just, we take students from 6th grade to 8th grade math, about the top 60% in that grade level. So it's still a very high score, one that we're not concerned with. We're not going to worry about meeting an indicator and not doing what's best for kids at that point. Then over here is how the students actually do on the tests, not just if they pass or not. So we had 42% of our kids and change scored at the advanced or advanced plus level. The advanced plus level, those kids scored advanced, but they were accelerated in a particular subject. So if a 5th grade student takes a 6th grade test and scores advanced, then you become an advanced plus in that, but they really just scored advanced in that. 27% scored accelerated, and then you see the percentages for proficient and below proficient as well. So basically, when you're looking at this, about 70% of our kids scored advanced or accelerated on the state test. This then is used to calculate performance index. A perfect performance index, according to the state, is 120. So they take this 107 divided by 120 and you get a percentage. This 107 constitutes the highest performance index we've had since air tests have started. We've gone up incrementally each year. Last year we were 106.1, this year we're 107.0. In general, that was a trend we saw across the state. And the state scores for some districts went down, some districts went up, but in general they went up just a little bit last year.
And that number is not comparable to past years when there's been a similar kind of numbers because it's been different testing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we had, I remember the old OGTs and OAAs, it was in the 111s, 110s.
Right.
And so the real measure that you can look at is where do you rank in the state compared to other school districts. And back then we were getting 111s, 110s, and so on and so forth, but we were 32, 35, 33, 31, 25 in the state. This PI score is ranked 13th in the state. So we've continually gone up, even though the score may fluctuate. Your ranking in the state is kind of gives you at least a benchmark for how you're falling compared to other districts you want to compare yourself to. That's the top score in Central Ohio as well. So they take those two components, they take 75% of this performance index score and 25% of this indicator score, 23 out of 24 to get to 95.8%, and they mash those together, put it into a table that I'm not going to show you up here, and that's how you get your A for this particular measure. So again, last year we were 106.1. Just some other things that I pulled out of the data that's available online for anybody to look at. 16 of the 22 subjects we tested were in the top 50 in the state. So you can actually rate how your students' passage percentage was in each of the different areas. Last year we were 12 out of 24. So we improved significantly in that area. And then we're one of only 38 districts to meet the gifted indicator. The gifted indicator is a measure of how well your gifted students perform, what their growth is. They have to have at least an average level of growth, or it's got an above level average growth percentage, and then how well you serve your gifted students, if you're serving them or not. So we ended up meeting all three of those indicators. Only 38 districts out of 607 districts in the state did not meet that. Some of them meet the indicator, but they don't serve all their gifted students, or some of them serve all their gifted students, but they don't score well enough on the state assessments. Those are usually two things that keep people out of that, of meeting that indicator.
How do you know if you've served the gifted student? What's the...
If they get a WEP or a
criteria
WAP. If they get a written education plan or a written acceleration plan based on clustering, based on taking AP classes at the high school level, honors classes, that we call honors classes advanced. That's just a different terminology. You can serve them in any numerous amount of ways. Accelerations, another service model. And then we have our discovery program GIS.
So there's an identification requirement, but this is really about whether there is a written education plan associated with that.
Absolutely. So,
Which we do throughout all the grades. We do
Absolutely.
all through elementary and everything as well.
except for kindergarten.
Right.
Cars identify them when we don't know them yet, so that's the only place where we don't.
Right. And our change in service model at the elementary school won't necessarily negatively impact that either.
No.
Because we still will be doing Webster or Webster.
Yeah, what that caused us to do is be a lot more intentional about placing students in classes. So if you have 30 students in a class that are gifted in reading, you try to cluster those students together in groups of 6, 7, 8, depending on the number of students you have, so that they form what's called a gifted cluster within that classroom. The entire classroom is not gifted, just that cluster of students, and then the teacher. We do a lot of professional development with our staff. And project-based learning is a perfect example of that, because that can be applied to all students at all levels to serve those gifted students in those particular areas. Okay, next is the K-3 literacy component. I put this one next because this is the area we didn't get a rating, but we actually got a score. So if you go online and look at this, the way K-3 literacy is measured is if a student was off track in 2016-17 in the fall, are they now on track from a reading perspective in 2017-18 in the fall? So this is a fall-to-fall measurement, except for the very last part, which I'll get to in grades K through 3. So if you look at this, we had 3 students that were off track in the fall of 2016-2017 on the diagnostic we gave for reading, which is the MAP test, which is a state-approved assessment that we can give. None of those students became on track in the fall of 2017-18, that's why it's 3-0. First grade, we had 14 off track, and then we had 5 on track in the fall of their second grade year. 31 were off track in second grade, and I'll explain why that number is a little bit bigger here in a second. 21 of them were back on track in the fall of their third grade year. The reason this number is so much larger, this is the first time that students, when they take the MAP test, they have to read it themselves. In kindergarten and first grade, it's read to them. Quite a shift, moving into second grade, and all of a sudden, they have to read it themselves, and they just don't do well the very first time. And you can see that 21 of them getting back on track at that point, that's a significant percentage right there. Just a flaw in the diagnostics, but this is how the state measures it. The third part of this is how many students were off track at the beginning of third grade, but then at least passed the state assessment. So you basically have about 6 months, 7 months until they test to get that student from an off-track status to an on-track status. So they add all these numbers up to get the denominator, and this is how many students we got back on track, and you divide those two, and that's where this percentage comes from. The average for the state is made the lowest level of a C in this particular report card. So the average for the state last year was 34.9% of students who were off track got back on track. We fell at 45.8, so had we got a grade here, we would have had a C. However, we had less than 5% of our kindergartners identified as off track. And because of that, we get a no grade, because now you're getting into very small numbers from an N size perspective, and that can identify individual students. So you have to have at least 5% be off track in kindergarten, or you get a no rating. This doesn't affect us, doesn't help us or hurt us in our grade card. But it's important. I mean, we don't stop looking at it because we don't get a grade. This is very good data. Last year, this number was 28% for us. So we saw some significant improvement. And if you remember from one of the presentations we gave last year, last summer was the first time we did summer intervention for a lot of students that normally wouldn't get summer intervention through Title I services. And I think that, along with some great work by our teachers in the classroom, is why you saw that 18% jump. That's significant from one year to the next. Third grade guarantee is not a graded component, but it is on the report card. And it basically says how many of your students made it from third grade to fourth grade, and how did they do that? Either they met the threshold on the state assessment, or they met a threshold on the MAP or Terranova test. And 100% of our students either passed the state assessment, 97% of them, or 5 got the alternative pathway through MAP or Terranova. And then we had 1 student that was exempt because of an IEP, and 1 who was alternately assessed in that particular class. So 100% of our kids move on to fourth grade. That's a good thing. Graduation rate is very self-explanatory, but there's 2 graduation rates that they look at here. One is your 4-year graduation rate, and one is the 5-year graduation rate. So if you remember, a couple times we've said, why is our graduation rate so low? Why is it like 96%, 95%? We talked about that 5th year that some of our special education students, where they go to Project Search or other programs in the county. Well, if you look at our 4-year to 5-year, that's the difference in these two. We had one student that was in our original cohort in 2016 who didn't even finish at Granville High School but didn't get a diploma, so they count against us. All the rest of those students made it to graduation at that point. From the previous class, and we would expect this number to be 99.5 or 100% again next year as well. So the 5-year rate is going to be a little bit higher because of some of those 5th-year programs that we have. So the gap closing component changed a little bit. These are based on subgroups, and normally we've only had 2 or 3 subgroups for each area. Now the end size for a subgroup is reduced from 30 to 25. When that happened, that moved our number of subgroups from 3 or 4 to 8 in this district. So now we have subgroups of all students, Asian or Pacific Islander students, Hispanic, multiracial, white, economically disadvantaged, English learner, and students with disabilities. And you're rated on what those students are expected to score in each subgroup area, and if you meet that goal or not. So the areas in yellow are areas that we met the goal, and even in some cases met the long-term goal, which is met for 5 years from now. We're well above in most areas, which is good for the future. Doesn't mean we rest on our laurels, it just means we're in a really good place right now from an English language arts perspective. And you'll see the same thing when we get to math. The one area that we did meet, we only had 24 of our students, 24 of our Asian Pacific Islander students passed the ELA test. We needed to have 25 to meet the goal. So that's the one area we didn't make, and that's why we got 7 out of 800 points in ELA. We needed one more student to pass the test, because the goal was 92.4, and we only had 91.07%. So it's something we'll look at, just like in the past where we've had other subgroups not meet particular areas, and look at individual students there in that particular. But that's district-wide, grades 3 through high school. In math, we were 800 out of 800. Again, the same subgroups. You see we have 8 different subgroups up here. And again, look at the long-term goals. For our Hispanic student, the long-term goal is 84.6. We're at 106.1 basically. For multiracial students, 87.6. We're at 111. We're well above the long-term goals, and that's where we obviously want to stay in terms of that. And then you'll see some significant increases over here for some of our subgroup populations as well, from this year to last. The final piece of the gap closing graduation, or gap closing component is graduation. Now here, we're not going to have many subgroups because individual classes only have 200 kids. You're not going to have subgroups of 25 within that class. It's very rare that we have anything except all students and white non-Hispanic students as our 2 subgroups. So we're going to, most of the time, be 200 out of 200 in that particular section. They then take the percentages from all 3 of those areas, add them up together, and then divide by 3. Something new this year is we have to show improvement with our English language and learners. The reason we get 0 points there, but it doesn't impact our grade, is we don't have 25 English language learners in the district. That number, though, is going to decrease to 20 next year and 15 the year after that. And so we could see a report in the future where how well our English language learners improve on the ELL test the state gives could be a factor in this particular component score. Right now, it's not. We have an exam in front of me. I think we had 15 total last year that took the assessment. And then finally, well, not finally, but the last piece of this is the prepared for success grade before we get to progress. This is the one we got to be in, so this is kind of how the state works. Jeff and I got an email from the State Board of Education minutes, meeting minutes, and it basically said that they were going to raise the passing score for prepared for success from 90 to 93% because it just felt like it was the right time to do it. So it was a very arbitrary move. We actually went up from 90 to 91.4% in this, and this is based on these kids get honors diplomas when they graduate. Are they remediation free on their ACT? Do they take AP classes and get a 3 on the test when they take it? You get points and bonus points for all those different scenarios. So we ended up 11th overall in the state. Our score went up 1.4%, but because the passage score is now 93, we got a B, when last year we got an A when we were at 90%, and that was the A. So we actually improved. Only 9 districts in the state earned an A. One little piece of data I pulled from this that I thought was interesting, we had the 3rd highest percentage of our students that had remediation-free scores on the ACT and SAT in the state of Ohio, which I thought, that's, for our students that go to state schools, they can walk into that knowing they're not going to take, math and language arts courses that are below level 100, but they will actually get credit for graduation from those particular classes. So we're doing better in this, it's something we'll look at in terms of trying to improve in this, but we did improve, it just didn't improve enough to meet the new threshold.
One of the things that I'll jump in, if you look at that industry recognized credential, that's a 0. I know Joyce Mulaney at CTEC is looking at that and advocating because that threshold doesn't necessarily align with how they issue credentials.
Correct.
And so she is trying to advocate for the methodology to align because, obviously you can see, we sent 14 kids there and graduated, I think, 7 last year and had a 0 there. So she's working on that issue.
Some of the things is that the credentials that they count are students weren't eligible to take.
Correct, exactly.
So that's where the
You
disconnect.
can't take
You can't take it, so.
if it's not.
Right, right.
Why would it not be eligible?
Because they haven't had the education, it's beyond where they are in their career education.
Okay.
So it's meant for, adult ed and beyond.
Okay, thank you.
And then finally, I saved this one for last. Progress, I think, is the most important and the only component that really is something that you can look at and say, okay, are you moving kids from point A to point B or beyond? And our progress growth, you can see we got an A in every single area. The different colors represent how much above or below average you are. Anything green is above average, anything yellow is right at average, and anything red is below average. We don't have a lot of red. It's pretty much solid green across the board. And when you look at this holistically, our growth in the state was 8th best overall. So not only do we have high achievement, we have high growth amongst our students. And if you break that down further, our students with disabilities had the highest composite score for growth in the state. And our gifted students were 13th best in the state overall. So it's a rare thing to have high achievement and high growth. I put a lot more stock into this piece than I do with the other components just because it shows that your students are progressing from an outside measure that we can develop on our own. Whether those tests are valid and so on and so forth, we can have a whole other long conversation about that. But our students are performing, and they're performing at a very high level, and they have for all 3 years that the new air tests have been out. We've gotten an A every single year. This is the first time we've had an A all the way across the board like this. So there's the wrap-up of our local report card. Before we get into the quality profile, do you have any questions about this? Anything that I wasn't clear on? Anything that you want some more clarification about?
Ryan, it's probably unfair to ask since changes tend to become arbitrary when they change a square. If you looked at this and were trying to project where it's going to be changed next year, how the cheese is going to be moved again?
We may have.
Yeah. Well, the end size going from 30 to 25 and next year from 25 down to 20, that may bring another subgroup or two into the conversation. That doesn't hurt us though. I mean, I had mentioned to Jeff last year when they said it was going to go 30 to 25. I said, we're going to get 3 or 4 more subgroups, and that's okay. I mean, the more they want to measure us, we're going to, that's going to look very positive in our district if we had the same level of performance by our students on those assessments. So that wasn't something that was really urgent in my mind in terms of making any changes or anything. So I think that's going to be one change we know is coming. Prepared for success. Like I said, that was a very arbitrary move. I just don't know. I think eventually they want to get to 100%. So that they can say, equivalently, every student is now, your points match up one for one for every student, even though not every student gets a full point. There's ways there are things you can do in the district if you wanted to increase that number. For example, we could make every senior take the College Credit Plus English Language Arts course, but they all have to have senior English and do it in-house and so on and so forth. is that really what's best for kids? Maybe, maybe not. And then number two with that, that's going to be a significant cost to the district as well. So, but those things are in place around the state, and that's what some districts have decided to do in these situations. We're going to let kids pick what classes they want to take. We have students that, all they need is a social studies class to get the honors diploma, but they have an internship at a local business in the afternoon. You make them take a social studies class, or you let them go out and get the internship. I think that's an easy decision. And it's a decision that we have erred on the side of the student, probably to the detriment of this a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay, so much more exciting is the quality profile. So this is really hard, when I was talking to Jeff about summarizing this, like what do you pull out of the quality profile? Because it's all good stuff. But I wanted to pull out just a few things. First of all, for those of you who don't know what the quality profile is, it's a document that about 85 districts around the state put out. It's through the Alliance for High Quality Education. It's a group that we are a part of. There are a lot of schools that have similar demographics to us, but also a lot of schools that just have similar interests. That education can't be measured solely by this. But there's a lot more that goes on in every school in the state that's much more important. You might want to say this is a grassroots effort to point out the good that happens in every school district across the state. And there are 7 different sections of that. I pulled out a few things of the highlights that I thought were really special from this past season in those areas. First of all, Global Scholars Diploma. Now, we've talked about that before. We had 26 seniors, so that's over 10% of our senior class graduate with the Global Scholars Diploma. The previous year we had 3 or 4. So we're seeing exponential growth in that program. And in year 4 and 5, you should start to see exponential growth in that program. So they went through all 3 levels, made the presentation, and got the diploma from CCWA. From a PBL perspective, we've talked extensively about that particular initiative in our district. At GES, the Kindergarten Hero Project, which I know everybody heard about, and was an awesome project, and one of the reasons why Mariah and Janine were here tonight. Second grade did a bee conservation project. Jeff and I got nice little baggies full of Save the Bee baggies on our desk one day. We were supposed to go home and plant the wildflowers and so forth. They didn't know what my green thumb was like, or they wouldn't give me the bag, but we tried.
But they did write, don't eat this. Because they know we typically eat everything.
Yeah. In 6th grade, GIS, they did the Genius Hour project. So every 6th grader chose something they were passionate about, and they worked on that during their Genius Hour at the end of the day, certain days of the week, and then had a huge presentation to friends and family at the end of the year. At the middle school, the 8th grade science class worked very closely with the National Transportation Safety Board, and they designed cars that were safer. They had to go down this ramp, and they crashed into things, and they put eggs in there, and things had to break. But they actually worked with the engineers and scientists from that safety board. And the winners were supposed to go there, but we actually got the 2 days we had off were both days they were supposed to go there. So I don't know, Lisa, did they ever actually get to go there?
No, they didn't.
So-
But the good thing is, the scientists there, they'll want to work with us again this year.
And then at the high school, you have the Global Awareness Project. Every senior is involved in the Global Awareness Project. And the amazing thing about that is when we ask the seniors, tell me about the project, they don't talk about, oh, I learned so much about this country, how I did, they talk about working with other students. They talk about developing empathy for, working with somebody from another country and almost having the confidence to say, this is a problem in that country, this is a way I think you can solve it, but then listening to feedback from the people who have lived there or have been there over time. It's an amazing project, and it's really grown over the last 4 or 5 years under Matt's guidance. And then the Land Lab expansion in collaboration with 4th grade science classes. So we know we expanded the Land Lab, but now 4th grade science classes are making kiosks with information that, so when you walk around, if you don't know what you're looking for, it can help you know what you're looking for as you go through the Land Lab. And our tech classes are building the actual structures for those kiosks. The fine and performing arts at all grades, we could have a 30-minute presentation on just that section alone. 90% of our students at the high school are involved in a club or sport or activity. That's an amazing number, and it does not happen everywhere. Athletics, we had the indoor practice facility, we had 9 LCL titles, which is a lot. Usually it's 3 or 4 every year. And then some other things happened. We had Denison students from a community perspective. We had 16 different Denison students come to Read to our students to support literacy at GES. Look at all the partnerships that we have with different groups. I mean, when you start reading that name, you've had presentations here of what those groups have done to support students and staff in our schools. We looked at mental and physical safety of our students. We had some safety upgrades. We are accredited Heart Safe again, and we had mental first aid training for a vast majority of our staff. A clean audit is always a good thing for the treasurer's office. I know Mike's very proud of that. He should be. We offered free summer literacy intervention to over 100 students this year between Title I services and extended school year services. And then we had positive behavioral intervention systems at all schools this past year. So there's a lot of good things going that you don't see here, that I think are more important than state test scores, and that's certainly my opinion, but I think it's the opinion of a lot of us hold in this room as well. And that is the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
So one of the things that I'll mention is at the August Lincoln County kickoff meeting, they hosted a panel of students that just graduated from all the Lincoln County schools. And our student that was there talked extensively about their experiences in Granville schools, but also about their project-based learning experiences. And not only did they talk, they were extremely articulate about what the takeaways were. You know, Ryan mentioned empathy, talked about the collaboration, the networking, the ability to persevere through challenges and difficulties. All the outcomes that we want our students to experience, this student referenced. And when he finished, 3 or 4 people on the panel said, I think that's why Granville does what they do, because we didn't have that experience. And I thought that was really telling. Now, I think that that's important, but it's also important that we talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So some of this, you know, this work starts to proliferate other districts. That's why we work with several other districts in the PBL cohort and the SOAR network. And I think it's something that really separates us from a lot of school districts, and that's why parents want their students educated in Granville schools. So, very positive, anecdotal.
Yeah, it's fantastic results every year. I mean, we're so proud of things like that. And we can find ways to keep them out in front of the community as well, right? And find ways to share this. It's meaningful for people. The numbers are easy, right, and are wonderful and always show good, but they're really the core of it is in all the other stuff that we do that doesn't show up in those numbers. And it's kind of a longer story, but it's the important one that I hope comes out through our communications and how we respond to questions about this. So, great work for sure.
I agree. I think in many ways that quality profile is our response to the preparation for success measurement. Because those things you pointed to, Ryan, you highlighted in many of the other programs that you didn't even have time to mention. Those to me are all what goes into defining or preparing students for success when they leave here. And I say that having the benefit of having 3 kids who graduated from here and have gone on and have just been through the education they received, you've been extraordinarily well prepared to work with others, to find opportunities to collaborate, to develop relationships. It's all of those, what we might call soft factors, that aren't really soft factors. The factors are actually essential factors in preparing students for success that are reflected. So to me, that's what speaks volumes about what we're doing.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so next, Tanya's going to come up and talk a little bit about facilities. As you know, we have a 20-year facility plan that is currently underfunded by about $500,000 annually. One of the things that we had to do in May, obviously we addressed the $640,000 that we needed to address in the operating budget through the reduction in force and some of the pay or fees instituted and payment convenience fees being shifted back to the parents, but another aspect of what we had to do was look at our facility plan and what we were going to plan on deferring maintenance on, because we were going to be, not able to spend that much money out of our capital budget as well. So we wanted Tanya to come and talk a little bit about, what's in that 20-year plan, but also what we deferred this year, and then some of the things that we accomplished over the summer from the facilities and operations standpoint. And here's
We
that.
need sound in my presentation, so.
Really?
Yes.
That's something I didn't realize. I did not hear that.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
Okay, it's okay, because even if you just see the visual, you'll get the message. All right, well, thank you for having me here this evening. The last board meeting, Russ did ask for us to provide a report on our deferred current improvement costs with facilities, and so we put together this graph. And you can see on the left column what our facility needs are. The second column is the recommended budget for the 2019 school year, or fiscal year, and that is based on this facility study that Jeff mentioned. And then our actual allocations, the third column, and the deferred expenditures, that amount, that cost is in the last column. So with concrete and asphalt, it was $135,000, and we did go ahead and spend that allocation. For the flooring, we did not do any floor replacements, nothing with a carpet or the floorboards or tile. This school year, the mechanicals also deferred about $350,000. However, we do have a sprinkler system at the high school and the middle school that is in need of repair replacement, and so that is something that we will have to have funding for to do that. Projects, we were anticipating or hoping for $160,000 for projects. However, we only have $60,000, so we deferred $100,000. The roof repairs, we actually have those going on currently at GMS and GHS, so we're spending those dollars. So the deferred expenditures amount to $565,000.
So Tanya, the mechanicals are things like boilers, air
Boilers,
conditioning.
chillers, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Things that we take for granted until it is
So they fail.
95 degrees, yes, and they fail.
And on the project side, those are individual improvement projects within the buildings that have been identified as an area that needs to be addressed in
Yes,
the long-term plan.
yes.
You'll see some of the projects referenced on the next slide when we talk a little bit about safety.
Safety is our next slide here, and the first thing I wanted to talk to you about were the barricading devices, and we were able to install 9-o'clock barricading devices in our elementary school and our intermediate school. I will show you a video on how to use those. They're very simple for the young students to be able to use in the event that they need to do so. The middle school and high school have the ratchet straps that we had installed last spring, but there were a few rooms in both buildings that needed the night lock system because of how their doors are, which way they swing in or out, and also the proximity to the wall and not being able to use the ratchet strap. I'm going to go ahead and play the video for you. Perhaps. Ryan?
Yeah.
Oh,
Just double click.
I can't get the, I'll see it. Oh. Is this track? It's not letting me, oh, there it is. Oh. Yeah, I missed out. But that's okay, it'll show you how to use the devices. So each room has that box next to the door with the device. You just slide it in to the bottom and your door is barricaded. It's that easy to use, and my understanding and all the feedback that I've received from everyone is that they are very happy and pleased to have those in their classroom. So that's been a great addition to our school buildings. We were also able to purchase 26 additional two-way radios to bring our total of two-way radios for communications in the district to 46. The new radios actually allow us to communicate across the district, so we can be at the elementary school and actually speak to people at the intermediate school using the two-way radios, which is new for us over the past couple of years. That allows us to obviously tell everyone in the district at one time of the situation that may be appearing. In fact, earlier this year, we actually used it to see if everyone's electricity was out. So, you know, it can be used for a variety of things, but definitely in emergency situations, they do come in handy. Those two-way radios don't depend on Wi-Fi, cell service, or even having electricity. This year, we also had to put new PA systems in our intermediate school and elementary school. We just couldn't hear in some areas of the buildings. We also did install citizen aid wall packs. We have 8 in the district, and they are placed currently at the locations next to the AEDs in each building. We also ended our radon testing, and we installed some mitigation devices. There were 2 areas in the district that needed mitigation devices. They were both in the areas of storage closets or storage rooms. One area was in the intermediate school, in some rooms adjacent to the library, and the other area was a storage room inside the industrial tech room. Key scan system, that's the automated door system that we have that controls our door locks. That system was upgraded to an Aurora software program. And the old system was just basically, it was just not reliable. It was leaving doors open when they shouldn't have been, or locking them when they should have been unlocked. So that is working out well as we continue to learn that system.
Tanya, if I can just to clarify, so every classroom in each of the 4 buildings now has a barricading device, whether it's the
Night lock,
straps or...
yes,
Okay.
that's correct. Any more technical difficulties?
On the automated door locking software upgrade,
Yes.
and I know we don't disclose everything that we do, for good reason, but essentially that's a monitoring system for all exterior doors
Yes,
and can alert someone if an exterior door is blocked open
correct,
or not securely shut.
yes, yes. Okay, summer projects. We have completed some concrete and asphalt repairs across the district. We have also added an ADA compliance sidewalk for the softball and soccer area. As I mentioned earlier, we are doing some roof repairs right now in the middle school and high school. The kitchen at the high school has a walk-in freezer and a dishwasher. The grounds crew laid 3,800 square feet of sod of the soccer field to fill in areas by the goal mouth in the center of the field. The motor lift of the station at GIS was replaced. We've also moved to a new management system for our scheduling purposes, for field trips, and maintenance requests. It's called Facilities Management Exchange, FMX. It replaced SchoolDude. That's actually a cost savings to the district and is much more user-friendly, both on the user side, like all of the staff, and then also on the administrative side, running reports to look at what is going on with work orders, schedule requests and whatnot. So it's nice. Of course, there was a little bit of a learning curve, but we are moving along quite well. We also replaced 2 rooftop units, one at the elementary school and one at GHS. And then we made some repairs to our football, the bleachers of the football field. We replaced some boards and we also put some railing up to make those safe. So, that concludes my presentation. Do you have any questions for me?
So in terms of the deferred maintenance issues, how are you looking at that for the coming year? Obviously with $1 million maintenance budget and identified maintenance needs that exceeded $1 million a year. You have the same amount of money to work with, presumably be finding other things that can be or that you would have to defer coming years, and then and can you tell us a little bit about how you're sort of ranking those priorities? So are the things, the $500,000 projects that were deferred this year, are they assured that they're going to be done next year, or can they get pushed down the road?
Well, we are pushing things down the road as we can. I mean, basically, it's safety that comes first, what we're prioritizing. And then those items that we need to function, in the buildings so that the climate is safe and secure and comfortable. And the HVAC, we can't push those down the road too long. That doesn't work very well.
It seems to be, we're in the situation where something that is close to end of life ends life. And then it becomes a must replace
Yeah.
versus a potential part of the maintenance plan. So we are getting caught in that trap right now. And so one of the things that we didn't even reference there is, our furniture replacement, but we didn't replace any of the furniture. The one thing that I was surprised by in coming to Granville is it seems like most of the furniture was potentially donated at some level from some other vendor or like State Farm or something like that. I know some came from a community college. The district never really truly invested much in furniture acquisition. And I know for a fact that when GIS was built, very little furniture was actually acquired through that bond process, which is atypical for school districts when they're doing that type of work. So that we didn't even reference that, but those are the things that we're constantly dealing with that are kind of smaller in scale, but those things build up. And you don't really want kids falling on the floor or, their desk falling apart right in front of them.
Relative to defraying some mechanical costs on things like HVAC, in the past I thought, oh, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But in reality, my experience with industrial management of facilities is that you end up with equipment that's less efficient, right? And you end up putting more belts and time and fixing and Band-Aids, right? And so if you look at the overall system cost of how you most effectively run a big organization like this, you really got to stay on top of that stuff. It seems like, oh, it's okay, it didn't break yet, right? And maybe it won't for a year. But in reality, you're paying more for it, right? And it's like, it's hard to kind of connect with that, right? That like, oh my gosh, we don't need it, well, let's get it done. We really do. You have to stay on this plan, right? And that's a risk, right? And the risk is it's going to go bad in the middle of winter, right? And then, you've got disruption, and then you've got more costs, because everybody needs a new furnace in the winter, and, it's just more of a problem. So I hope we can find a way to get on top of this. And that will lead to some of our further discussions, I'm sure, so.
No, I think it's essential. Everything that we have, whether it's a desk or a boiler or air conditioner or something else, has a useful life. And as Thomas indicated, it's always more effective, efficient, and less expensive in the long run to replace things on a schedule than have to replace things on an emergency basis.
Yep.
And there are always things that we don't anticipate, like the fire sprinkler safety system at the high school turned out to be urgent repair this year. So you end up spending more in the long run if we can't have a consistent maintenance and update and replace it. We've never had, for as long as I've been in this district, we've never had luxurious facilities. I don't think anybody here has called for that. I don't think anybody has urged that, but we need to make sure that we have a safe and comfortable environment so we can learn and protect students. Thank you for what you're doing. I know you're stretching every dollar as far as you can, sometimes farther than you can.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, you get to hear from me on the first reading of some policies. So this summer, the General Assembly was active, They passed a couple of bills that will require us to update our policies. And so I'm going to kind of walk through some of these, but really just to give you a sense of what is part of this update. There is some recommendations basically coming out of, honestly, lawsuits and litigation related to crowdfunding. And so we're going to touch on that in a little bit. New requirements for district credit cards, that's coming out of the Attorney General's office and the Auditor's office. Guidance on federal procurement. House Bill 318 was passed, and that really looked at positive behavioral intervention supports and suspensions and expulsions, and it put some limitations on what discipline you could render for kids under the grade 3 and below. Senate Bill 216 was the Ohio Schools Deregulation Act, and it had multiple, we called it a Christmas tree bill because it had multiple ornaments that are byproducts that will address our policies in the future. And then there were a couple of other things related to changes in OHSAA regulations that affect transfer bylaws. So those are embedded in here as well. So I'm just going to kind of walk through some of these. And it's going to be brief, but I want you to just be aware of it. The minutes policy is really just when the board president signs the minutes, it's not a form of any action except for just documenting that the board president has seen the minutes. So apparently there was some litigation related to that. School board legal status, we're just updating our policies to make sure that we include Granville exempted school districts and the fact that we're represented by 5 elected board members, so we'll include that. The budget planning process, that is related to the 5-year forecast. Some legislation was passed, and the October forecast can now, after this October, be done by November 30th. Because a lot of people were changing their 5-year forecast, and then the November election was taking place, and then they had to update their October forecast. So they just said, why don't we make the forecast due by November 30th? So they passed that legislation. Mike, did you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, it doesn't take effect until November of 19.
The purchasing of the purchasing policy is just giving a limit to what generic supplies can be bought up to a dollar amount, and that dollar amount for us is $5,000, which is a blanket purchase order that cannot extend beyond the current fiscal year. So it's basically just creating limits.
It's actually loosening. It's
Oh, it
actually
is?
loosening.
Oh.
From the current limits, that it's by quarter instead of by fiscal year, which is kind of silly. So it's just making it being able to do it, and where you can open $5,000, you can sanitize the whole year, instead of having to close it every quarter, we open a new one.
Okay. I skipped over the federal grants funds administration. That's just to change to some language that the records are sufficient to verify that the time spent in compensation were allocated to the correct fund for federal guidance or federal fund allocation, and some date changes. The bidding requirement, there's some permissive language, and all purchases over $25,000 except for state term should come to the board. We've been doing that on a regular basis, so that's not anything different. We've kept that at $25,000. Petty cash, I'm getting to that. I think I skipped over that. I think fortunately stuck some fingers.
I will say, we do not have any petty cash accounts.
I was just going to reference that. Okay, petty cash accounts is also related to the debit and credit accounts. And so there is a change in with the language as far as how that needs to be monitored. And it really is, like Mike said, we don't have those accounts. So it's a change, but it's not a change to our practice because we don't have them. Okay. Let's see, bidding requirements, I talked about purchasing procedures. That is more of a regulation than the policy, and we have to identify the number of vendors that we select bids from and get the federal procurement process from, and we have identified that that is 3 vendors. Mike?
That's not really an issue either, because that's for using federal funds to buy things, and we generally do not use federal funds to buy anything. We usually only use federal funds for either salaries or some purchase services for PD.
Mike, do you want to address credit cards?
The credit card policy came out of some issues that have been going on in different places around the state from the auditor, where a lot of what we have to do is actually what we do in practice right now anyway. You have 2 choices of how to do it. Either the treasurer's office can control all the credit cards, or it can be decentralized. The buildings can control them with credit limits and specific definitions of who's allowed to use them and what they're allowed to be used for. Most of the changes that are in the policies are things that we are already doing. We already have a defined credit limit for what can be on any card. That won't change. Part of the problem is there's some version of the language that I thought didn't make sense given what the route we're trying to do. I've been working trying to get some clarification from OSBA who's been drafting this on how receipts are, the process they have for receipts doesn't really make sense if you choose the option of not having the card centrally located. Having the card centrally located would be probably not a great idea in the way we operate. It would be very dislocating as far as efficiency. But we've not had any issues. Yet some of the other things as far as if a card is compromised, you need to, we have not issue, we've had cards compromised a couple times. We find out about it almost immediately and get them canceled. So again, those haven't been issues as far as we're concerned.
Mike, how frequently were you using credit cards as opposed to
We use credit cards quite a bit. A lot of it, now the big thing is, we've moved more and more towards purchasing stuff on Amazon. And Amazon does not take purchase orders. So pretty much everything that we have to do with Amazon is by credit card. We also, we do not allow the use of PayPal because the 1 or 2 times that has happened, it has caused nightmares. Trying to get things straightened out because nobody is quite responsible for it. And so, where a lot of times you use PayPal, we're using credit card because we don't use PayPal because it just hasn't worked using. And we haven't done PayPal very often, and we've had problems when we have, so we pretty much don't do that anymore. And then there are just other things where it's just more convenient to use the credit card. We probably average, Tina's we spend maybe about $50,000 on average,
Each month, yeah.
probably a month on credit cards across the district. Some are less, some are more, depending on when during the year.
First aid, food sales, wellness program, all of those are related to a new requirement that we have to submit annually through the consolidated report to ODE, information related to training and our food sales program and our student wellness program. So those are all required to change because we have to embed that November 30th report into those policies. Again, we're doing all of those things, now we just have to report them to the state. Thank you very much. The personnel policies, professional staff contracts, professional hiring of staff. In House Bill, or Senate Bill 216, they changed the language from highly qualified teacher to professionally licensed staff. So anywhere it's referenced in those policies as highly qualified teacher, it's now professionally certified staff. Staff gifts and solicitations and student fundraising, those are both related to crowdfunding. Mike, do you want to reference the crowdfunding policy and we are going to align it to our current fundraising policy. So there is a process that everybody has to go through to get permission to fundraise. There's no difference for the crowdfunding. It has to go through the building, myself, and finally Mike in order to approve it. So there's going to be rigorous checks and balances so that we don't have teachers just putting things out online saying, I want to do this, fund me. Because then once that happens, where does that money go? Does it ever come through the board? Those types of things have happened in other locations. And so, we want, projects to be able to be funded, but they need to go through our fundraising activities process.
So does that extend beyond the classroom to clubs and team sports?
And that is currently part of our student fundraising activities, all the activities that people do fundraising around. Yep.
What kind of things typically don't go through that in the past? What kinds of issues have we had, or how was this policy going to clean that up? Is it kind of the, team wants to sell more candy bars, or is it?
No, as a matter of
somebody
fact,
bringing back gifts
we've
to
actually
the
had
classroom?
requests for GoFundMe accounts at times, and we've denied them. And we've worked with the Education Foundation or some other organizations that are support organizations, PTO, to get the funding for those projects. Another perfect example of what could have been used to do, or a way to fund a project, the platform out at GIS. It's a project that the Environmental Science Group has taken up. They've been working with Terra Nova Builders. They've gotten revenue from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They've received money from Lincoln County Soil and Water and some other vendors that have supported the funding of that project. Again, all of that came through my office, but in some circumstances, those things in other districts have been put out on social media to fund with very little checks and balances of where that revenue goes once it's identified. So does that help give you at least a little bit of an example? We try to avoid any direct sales through that student fundraising. Maybe pencils that they sell in the school or things like that, but we try and avoid anything that's going to require a student to go door to door and solicit funds from people that they're not familiar with.
Yeah, I think it's just a balance to make sure we don't shut off any potential streams of support that would come from other avenues and things like that, and that we're open to finding ways to help those happen easily and quickly for a teacher or a team or something like that, right? So hopefully it's not too onerous of a process, but that it's appropriately monitored.
Yeah. And it was clunky at first, but I feel like people have gotten used to following the process. Occasionally we have to remind somebody that there is a process because they're unfamiliar or they're new and they forget. Interscholastic activities and interdistrict open enrollment. So as you know, Granville does not offer open enrollment opportunities. And we include that into our interdistrict open enrollment policy, but also in our scholastic policy, because there has been kind of an opening of a door related to athletics and people's ability to participate in the school district even if they're not enrolled, homeschool students and some other examples, which we do allow that if they are residents of the school district At homeschool, they can participate in our activities. But if they, let's say they go to GCA, but they live in Johnstown, and GCA doesn't offer the sport, they cannot participate in our sports. It is residence-based only. So we've adjusted that. The other change in interscholastic activities was the transfer rule that aligns with changes that the OHSAA have identified, which really, I think the main shift is moving from a year to 50%, correct?
Second half of the year.
Second half of the year,
Yes.
yeah. From a transfer standpoint. Okay? So then we get into hazing, bullying, harassment, weapons in school, student discipline, student suspension, emergency removal of student expulsion. All of those relate to House Bill 318. And the fact that if a child is under the age of 3rd grade or below, under the grade, 3rd grade or below, they cannot be suspended or expelled for certain circumstances. So that is a change. Senator Lehner was very passionate about that bill and received a lot of support in the legislature for that, and it has now passed. There are other aspects to that bill, but that is probably the most important because it impacts all those different references in the policies. Weapons in schools, the only nuance is that a knife is defined as a cutting instrument that has a sharp blade that is capable of causing serious bodily injury. They have added that in to the policy. Okay. Let's see, student suspension, expulsion, physical examination of students. It's really the search and seizure. Oh, no, that's physical examinations. Okay, so the district has the requirement to screen hearing, vision, speech, and communications. And so we have to do that now by November 1st. So there's a deadline for when we have to do those types of screenings. And that also relates to our November 30th reporting requirement to ODE. So that is part of what we currently do. It's just a little tighter time.
Okay.
Because they want, they could and they want us to report on it. How's that for a great answer? And then there were some additional aspects related to our emergency and safety plans because those plans evolve literally every single day. And so we have to put those things into those policies. So the new policy recommendation is for the online fundraising campaigns to align with our current student fundraising policy. So that language will align with the other policy that I referenced. And then there is, with the addition of the credit card policy, we're going to have to remove the regulations for credit cards and replace it with the new policy. Okay? Any questions? The good news is that a lot of the things that I just referenced, we already do from a practical standpoint. We're just changing policy to align with that. But as you can see, this was the result of the work that the General Assembly did this summer. So, questions, comments? You'll hold back. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan, do you have a clicker? Yeah.
You can turn that off.
Okay. All right, thank you for that report. We've now come to the portion of our agenda which is reserved for public comments. If there anyone who would like to make a comment, I would ask you to step to the podium and state your name and address, and please share your thoughts with us. Seeing none, we'll close the public comment and move on to board discussion. We had 3 items, I think, that we had outlined for board discussion. Uncollected lunch fees, the levy, and the CEDA must-have and wants. I'm going to suggest that we do uncollected lunch fees and the CEDA first, and then reserve the levy discussion.
Okay.
Because I think, at least for both the lunch fees and the CEDA, we need to tee that up for us and
Yes.
provide an update.
Mike is going to talk about uncollected lunch fees.
Uncollected lunch fees has been an issue for several years now. We have probably $8,000 to $10,000 of uncollected fees. Some of that will probably never be collected because it's students who have left the district. But others of it are students who are still here. The difficult part of this is the feds are, we have to come up with a new policy on how we're going to deal with it. But the feds have also outlined things you're not allowed to do as part of that policy, which makes it really difficult to then implement something that you can do. And so, this has been an ongoing discussion as to, how do we cut basically not allow students to buy anything anymore. And, it's been an ongoing, I think we had a discussion probably about 2 or 3 years ago. On how to handle that. I don't think we ever resolved how to handle that.
The reality is we're trying to
Yeah.
minimize the impact to students
Right.
and compel the parents to pay their obligation. And that is a challenge because on a day-to-day basis, the child can be accruing additional charges above and beyond the required meal, like the a la carte items and things like that. So trying to impact or change their behavior but not notifying them is a challenge. And then, how do we compel parents and notify them when we send home multiple messages to the parents and we get very little response on a regular basis?
To be clear, when you have outstanding balances, you also point out to the parents the availability of
Free and reduced
free and
lunch.
reduced
Yep.
lunch.
Every single time.
Just an
First.
application has to be filled out. And so you're talking about folks who don't avail themselves of that service, yet don't pay for lunch.
Correct.
And we generally send the forms with the notification for the free and reduced application.
And I recognize you've always been reluctant, and I think appropriately so, to put the student in a bad position. Something, a situation which could cause embarrassment or could cause them to just not want to get lunch, which is clearly not what we want to do.
And the feds have actually said
Right.
you can't do that. You can't, when the kid gets to the end of the line and they have something and they have a balance, you can't say, no, you can't have that, here, you have to take this. And the feds have kind of said, you can't do that.
So is it, and you may not know this, but is it your sense that at least some of this outstanding balance is, it's less related to an ability to pay and more related to willingness, a lack of willingness to pay?
That is our view on a significant portion of it, yes.
And then, so what's you referenced the new federal requirements, which impose upon us an obligation to pursue payment?
It's to develop a policy about how you are going to pursue payment. With the limitations that they have put on the things you cannot do to get payment. And so that's kind of where we are right now, struggling with how do you do one without doing the other.
So this is probably parents who have an ability to pay, but just choose not to for whatever reason, right? And the students are aware of this? Is it your sense that the students are aware and complicit with this? Like, I don't even know how to go after it, given the handcuffs were put on us, right? Like, I don't know how to
We don't
get
know
these
if the
messages
kids
passed
have
along.
any idea. Most likely not.
Certainly not the younger ones.
Right, yes, hopefully not. But again, when you're looking at the budget, $10,000 potentially over a 5-year lifespan, or a 5-year cycle, that's $50,000. That's not an insignificant amount of money. At one point, we talked about, do we, try and go to a collection agency? And after certain notifications, you send, the collection agency out to try and collect funds. There are a variety of different ways. We're not being very successful with our current methodology, which is notify, 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 and then notify again.
So if a student gets to the special register and they don't have money, they're not told they don't have money?
No.
The child seems to know that it's going to count as well. And it's something, he comes home and tells me, Mom, I need more money. I will be
They're told that they are getting low.
Or below 0. They probably get a balance, right? Do they not have a balance?
I don't know if they get a balance when it pops up.
But they
I
have
mean,
some
they
idea
look
where
at
they
the screen,
stand.
maybe.
They can
Yeah.
probably look at the screen.
I don't know that any of them look at the screen, but maybe.
We also have access to the parent portal,
Yeah.
students do.
Okay.
But they're not gonna log in.
Yeah. But none of them, they just punch in their code and go, they don't look at the screen to see how much money.
Is
They
there
probably
we
do
could almost
always
do some
kids
like,
that they're running low.
It would show
Yeah.
up, like, so it would show up on the screen.
Oh,
Like,
it
yeah.
will.
On the screen, but I would say
My kid does.
they don't.
They might look,
They might, so
Yeah.
some look, some don't.
Yes.
Yeah.
because I've had them come home and say,
Majority
look.
Yeah. Okay.
I wonder if we could almost do some polling by, instead of just sending a letter, making some phone calls, not like people listen to phone calls, but, if it's the school district's calling, from the office, it might be interesting just to understand, like, were you aware, right? And if they snicker a little bit, and then that's one response, right? But they're like, oh, really? I didn't know, right? Because I never checked their portal. It'd be,
I've been more direct.
it might be interesting, because, apparently letters don't work, right? And I've heard people snicker a little bit about, like, oh, it seems like they don't really do anything and when you have a balance. So I've kind of heard that out of people tell me that they heard people say, right? And I'm not sure how to break through that. And I'm reporting to credit agencies and getting debt collectors and things like that involved seems a little silly for a $5 overdraw, right? But there's probably some bigger ones as well, right? That might be at least worth like calling and mentioning to the folks that, would be our next step, and make sure that they hear that next step, because they obviously are not getting letters and so forth. I guess I wouldn't be completely opposed to that. That's not something that we want to be in the center of, and certainly not something that's actually financially all that beneficial, because it probably costs more to go out and get those guys than it does like the money you're going to get out of it. But we somehow have to fix the system, right? And make folks aware that this is an issue, and we do actually need to take the bills.
You're telling us an amount of money that is in arrears. Can you give us a sense of what percentage of the student population that might represent? And whether this is in arrears for a long period of time, or is there a rolling thing?
A lot of it is rolling, and I think the percentage of the population where it's a chronic, large number is pretty small, probably maybe a couple of dozen. Generally it tends to be a little bit more of a rolling thing. It's a chronic, is it a chronic $40 or $50, or is it a chronic $300?
Mike, you mentioned some of these kids left the schools graduated, perhaps, and gone on, so those are probably not collected. So, I know this from experience. When a child loses a library book, there's an economic consequence to that, which has to be cleared up before they graduate and get their report card. And maybe if they're a senior, maybe it's before they graduate and get their diploma. I don't know if that's the case or not. But is there a similar pattern that we could follow for something like this?
And Ryan, you'd have to help me with this, but I don't know that we're allowed to hold diplomas. There was a change several years ago, and I would have to check on that
Yeah.
and get more
And I
information.
haven't experienced the diploma issue. The report card I have, but then again, you know, maybe that's less important, that's what the grades are also available.
Well, see, we can withhold report cards, but it's online,
That's right.
so
You can-
people,
The impact is.
Transcripts, though, transcripts are.
Yeah,
transcripts.
and you can also make them, so they won't be allowed to participate in the ceremony.
Yeah.
You know, that may, I mean, if you've got a younger student who's in the situation, you may have a long ways to go before you get that, maybe that's not effective, but,
Yeah, and I have a sense more of the uncollectible is really not necessarily kids who have graduated, but families that have left the
Yeah.
district.
so from an accounting perspective, ought we not to just write that off, take it off our books?
At some point,
Declare it as uncollectible.
At some point, yes, we probably should. I think that would probably, the board would need to probably take action declaring it.
Do you have a sense of what percentage of that 8 to 10,000?
I haven't looked, it's been a while since I looked at that. The last time I looked, I think it was about 20% of it that was kids who are no longer here. But I have not looked at that more recently. It's easy enough to do.
Of the remaining 80%, you said some of it rolls, how much rolls just slowly and how much just doesn't move?
Well,
Give or take.
I'm probably gonna have to look at that again to see, to do the math on that.
I think what we really just wanted to get a sense of, like, you know, what are some of the absolutely don't do this from the boards, because we're gonna have to go and craft this policy. And so we want to bring maybe several different ways that we go about this, and then give you an opportunity to adjust the policy after the first reading. So we're really just trying to get a sense of your appetite for, you know, how far on the aggression scale do you want us to be?
I think the policy could be more open, but the application of it is like dependent on, again, you're not gonna call a credit agency if they're $5 over, right?
That's
But we
right.
should- But we should make sure that we give you that latitude if there is somebody that's, you know, obviously able to pay it from your perspective, and I'm not sure how you do that, right? But not so interested or willing, right? So I think giving you latitude in the policy and entrusting you to implement it appropriately is the best way to do the policy. And again, you know, reporting to credit agencies or going through a debt collector or whatever is a pretty significant deal, right? And not when you're gonna do for small dollars, but one we might as well keep in there for the case that there is somebody that's $1,000 over and doesn't happen to feel like paying, you know? I'm not sure if that's gonna get traction either, but, you know, I'm not sure what other avenue we have.
So
Like,
I'm hearing maybe some threshold that
yeah.
is like, if it's above 200, even
Yeah, I mean,
100.
I think we can also, actually, the option of turning it over to the Attorney General for collection, and that involves putting a lien on property.
Do we know, or can we find out if, because I like the idea of holding the transcripts, if it's a family, if they have an older sibling that's looking at college, and if they're not, I mean, I don't want to threaten anybody, but it's going to affect, you know, big brother or sister if they have multiple children in the school system that are, and they're in arrears on what they owe.
But I want everybody to have that opinion. Like, I want everybody to be like, wow, let me just check, because maybe it did, you know, so that, or whatever. So
I'm just
I think
curious,
that should be like,
what is our,
maybe- can
what
we,
is our obligation? Is it
I mean, in terms of providing lunch.
is it providing lunch, or is it providing the snack bar
No,
after
it's
school?
just- it's just a lunch.
Okay.
And it's certain, yeah, I think
There's
there's
certain-
protein, vegetable, fruit. Yeah, there's a basic lunch that we are required to provide.
is there some, is it within progress, but where both the grades and this thing is done? Is there some way to throw a big red flag in there and say, if you want to see the grades, click this button because you're overdue or something? I don't know.
They're separate ones.
Yeah.
Glenn will look into something like
I don't
that.
know, I mean, just, it's, yes, like our current notification methods are not working, right? You know, and I don't know what else. But also, if you have a mid-screen pop-up that says, you know, if you don't want to be investigated by the credit agencies, please let your pay your bill. You know, I don't know.
But blocking their access to the progress book.
Yeah, that's getting into like, it's grades and.
Well, but it
grades and
is
stuff like
something,
that.
I mean, from a red flag standpoint, I mean, that's something that we can pursue.
Yeah.
See if it's even possible.
So have we ever, we send out letter after letter after letter?
We've made phone calls.
We've made phone calls.
Yes, we have.
Okay, you get a response from people?
Yeah.
Just acknowledgement, yeah, whatever?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for the handout.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you leave messages and they don't,
Right.
you never hear back from them.
Okay, I think that's adequate. I mean, we're gonna bring back some version of a policy to you for a first read. We just wanted to get a sense of your perspective.
You know my view would be, we publish the names in our local newspaper, but that would violate the privacy issues with respect to students, and I don't want to embarrass the students. That's what we take pains not to do. Just
It's a parent's obligation to
like
have
trying to
chats.
parent and step up.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. All right, CETA must-haves and wants. Okay, so several weeks ago, I participated in a meeting related to the CETA or JED development, or the MOU with the township and the village related to the 16 corridor in how to create a joint collaborative agreement to develop an economic development area. One of the tasks that the group assigned was to have each entity go back and talk about what are their must-haves. What are their barriers? For us, you know, if you're thinking about the development of a corridor, a couple of things come to mind as far as must-haves or desires. One, I think it's important for us to have, you know, a seat at the table if they create some type of development board that would, you know, give us a potential seat at the table, just like we have a seat at the zoning and planning commission boards. The other thing that you need to consider is thinking about, you know, the type of limited development that we would be, you know, willing to accept or, you know, obviously we don't want a bunch of residential development out there. I think the comprehensive plan has identified that as a business economic development corridor, and we don't want to have a lot of new homes going in there because that would require us, or actually strap our facilities to the point where that would be detrimental to the school district. But we want to, you know, phrase it however we want to phrase it. But I think minimal to limited residential growth would be probably something that we would need to embed in there as well. The other thing that you should think about is, you know, financing. You know, typically these projects require some type of tax incremental financing in their construction. So what are you willing to potentially agree to from a short-term TIF or a payment in lieu of taxation, some type of structure that you would be interested in? Mike, what else am I not saying that I should?
I think those are really the main things is, are the seat at the table, you know, the three you mentioned, I think are the primary ones that I think we need to be on board for. They need to be on board for us for.
Yeah, it's great to be involved in this process, and thank you for sitting on that board. It's a good one for our community, and it's fantastic that so far, you know, it's traction. I see where it goes. You know, I would think that our continued involvement will be much better, right? So that seat at the table is really important. relative to residential development, I guess, it doesn't seem to me that's a prime residential development area, right? And that's not really something that we have a control over relative to the other areas. Like in the rest of the township, we don't necessarily have that authority to say no residential development to some extent. So I would think that it would be important, just as we do with, the planning commission, that we stay involved. And I think that's our key to ensuring that the development that happens is positive and productive for our community and sustainable balance of, residential and business development and so forth. And I'm not sure how to phrase that within there. I think that's going to be important to craft that so it's maybe not authoritatively restrictive, but clear about what our requirements are, what is beneficial to the school district and therefore the community from an overall tax base.
I think you can phrase it from the standpoint of aligning it to the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, that's a great.
Because
Yeah.
the comprehensive plan clearly identifies that as a business corridor.
Yep.
And so if you align your recommendation with the comprehensive plan language, I think you're sending a clear message of what it is the intent of that land usage is. And I think you get there without necessarily strong arming. We don't want, any residential. I would disagree with you. That land would be very advantageous.
On the west side.
Yeah, to residential growth. So I think we have to, it's something that we absolutely need to address in our recommendations back to.
If the services are there, you're saying? Or-
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they'd have to plug in sewer and water, but that's really what the whole.
That's what it's all about,
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you'd have a potentially a contamination issue on the property, but sure, for a certain amount of money, that's remedied.
So it's seat at the table. The other, so I mentioned financing, because typically when you look at a project like this, there is some type of TIF involved, or a tax abatement, or something like that. From an infrastructure standpoint, what we're trying to do is put water, sewer, and, at least conduit for the fiber infrastructure. They identified that this would be close to a $4 million budget, Craig? Is that what you remember?
4 to 5.
4 to 5. So, obviously, what we've been advocating for is, listen, if we have some impact at the short term, but there's a long-term benefit to us, we're willing to have that conversation. There are certain things that they can do without our approval, and we probably encourage them to avoid those options. And we have done some things recently with Newark that required a payment in lieu of tax as opposed to the TIF or with the TIF. So those are some of the things that I think we need to consider looking at the long-term benefit to the taxation structure if economic or if commercial base comes to that area. So I'm sensing, or at least in the past, we've had some agreement that we are willing to enter into conversations related to TIFs and alternative funding methodologies. Is that still true?
Certainly conversations.
Yeah, conversation, we're keeping an open mind.
Yes, for sure. I'm not, saying anything will go.
Right.
Remind me of the Middleton property, Jeff, how that.
The Kendall.
The Kendall, sorry, Kendall, yeah.
The TIF, I don't even know how long the TIF was supposed to be for, but it was paid off within about 7 years. I think it ended before it had to. And even the term, we did not get payments in lieu of taxes, if I remember correctly from that. It all, it predated when I got here. I don't remember the exact terms of it. I know it probably also was not 100% because we did get some property taxes from Middleton, from Kendall. And so I don't know all the details of what was in it from.
Just curious how much we forwent in terms of tax we got some.
Yeah, we did.
We had some, and actually, we did get some payment, with the taxes, now that I think about it, because the calculations had been messed up, and we had to correct all of the calculations, because they had not been paying us the correct amount. So we must be getting partial payments. The River Road TIF, we're getting 100% payments from the city of Newark for the Redwood development.
Anything else that you can think of? I mean, I'm not a developer. I'm gonna say that right up front. So, identifying these must-haves or wants is, limited based on my dealings with, these types of situations. But I think, if there are any others that you can think of, please either voice them now or send me an email. I will be bringing this feedback in written form. You will get a chance to see that prior to the meeting, so that you can opine that way as well.
To be clear, I think that
Yes, you do like to opine, that is accurate.
this is a great development. This is, we've been banging the drum for something like this for the better part of 5 years now. And the one thing that this community has lacked, that's the wrong thing to say, this community has lacked an overall development, joint development perspective that brings into play all of the parties that are affected and that can then direct the types of development that the community wants to see and accept into areas where it would be appropriate. And that's exactly what this is. And so I applaud the township trustees and the village council and leadership from both groups for pushing ahead on this and for showing real action in terms of how we can plan for development that's coming all around us, and how we can make sure that we impact where that development goes and what it looks like. And to me, the most important thing that we want at this point in time is a seat at the table. It's clear we can't contribute economically. We're not going to spend money extending sewer and water down 16. We're not going to extend waive development fees that don't come to us anyway. So we can't have the economic impact. I agree with you that it would be a concern if there was a proposal for a large-scale residential housing development going in there that put us in a position where we couldn't house those students. There's an economic benefit, obviously, to receiving more students, but at some point, we hit that tipping point where we'd end up building a facility and we're not prepared to do that. But I think as long as that group adheres to the comprehensive plan, and as long as that group welcomes the school board to the seat at the table to be involved in those critical discussions, that I would be satisfied with that. And when it comes to what we might do economically to contribute, whether it's agreeing to forego some short-term tax revenue in the form of a TIF, we'll have to look at it, obviously, when it comes up, but it would, in my view, that's an economic decision. If an opportunity is presented that has long-term economic benefit to the broader community, including the Granville schools, and some short-term forbearance of tax revenue, that can work. We can make that work, and if it brings the kind of economic development we need to see here in order to ensure the long-term stability of the schools, we'd be in favor of that. So I am very gratified and pleased that this discussion is moving forward. I'm extraordinarily happy that you've been integrally involved in that discussion, and let us know what we can do to keep that ball rolling.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, very well. Now you can talk about the
We do have
November 6th.
We do have a levy on the ballot, first Tuesday in November. you know, I'll sort of kick that off. There's a committee of community members on the levy committee who have been meeting on a regular basis, trying to plan a strategy for the campaign, because of course the school board and the school administration can't run a political campaign. We can educate, we can inform, and those of us on the board, everyone not at the board, can certainly advocate as we have, and as expected we will continue to do so. But I first want to thank those folks in the community who volunteer their time, their talent, their treasure, come out on you know, evenings and take time away from their family and their homes and their businesses to really work on a campaign that will be a positive, informative, well thought out campaign to explain exactly what is on the ballot in November and to lay out the facts for why we believe and why this board approved that levy, because we believe that it's an economic necessity to ensure long-term sustainability and excellence that we had a view of earlier this evening in our schools. I think it's essential. So I don't know whether folks on whether you have some comments you want to add to that, whether folks on the board have some comments or questions about the levy campaign or the levy itself.
Well, one of the things that I think I'm being asked most about is if it passes in November, what immediate changes will take place? Will there be a reversal of pay to participate or any of the things that have been put into place? And what I've been sharing is that the board made the decision for the fee structure for pay to participate for the entire 17-18 school year. That the 18-19 school year will be an addition.
No,
wait.
18-19.
I'm a year in the rears. 18-19 school year, and then the budget for the 19-20 school year will be a conversation in the spring. But that those fee structures will be in place for the entirety of this year, which I think is consistent with what you have articulated. And then, you know, the conversation will evolve to, so what else will be either restored or, and that's a future conversation for the board related to the budget at that time. Remember, also in this election, there's going to be a new governor. And, you know, we've talked about how in the past that's had a negative impact on the school's funding formula, or funding. So we want to be cautious about making any changes right after that decision is made. So we are working on, you know, trying to answer people's questions that they have. So again, if you have any questions that surface during your conversations with constituents, please send them back to us so that we can include them in any frequently asked question information that we distribute. And we can provide information. You saw probably the informational video that I released that talked about the nuts and bolts of the levy. And so we are trying to communicate as much information as possible given the limitations and constraints that we have.
Yeah, relative to like reinstating services or reversing fees and things like that and so forth. You know, I'm not inclined to make any promises or do anything like that. And if we do have any conversations about it, it'll be here at this table in public, right? It won't be behind the scenes and so forth. And just the same way we don't, haven't in the past always chosen to show a cut list of what will be cut if a levy doesn't pass. You know, you deal with these things as they come about, right? And the end of the school year when we're going through the budgeting process is the time to look at what's right and the feedback from the community that we will have received all year and so forth. And so forth. So I think that's the right answer, and I apologize not giving you more, you know, concrete things to tell back to constituents relative to this, but I don't think that's like appropriate to hold things out there or to do that in that way. It's not the way we've done in the past, and I don't see that the way it is, but certainly any conversation that we do have about changing fee structures or reinstating things will happen again in public, as all the other ones do, at this table with plenty of time for the public to make comments, and you know, we'll gather opinions and comments and take those things into consideration as the budget, you know, warrants.
I mean, there's decisions that we made in order to get us through the 18-19 school year, so it doesn't really make any sense that we would
Right.
change anything midstream. And we made them so that we wouldn't make cuts in the middle of the year, which is really disruptive to your
Exactly.
student engagement. So I think it totally makes sense that we will not, next year's budget will come up in discussion, like we should have done this
And this spring.
in the spring. Yeah.
But it's hard, because I've already heard conversations about like, what are you gonna cut if it doesn't pass? Right, and that's not the conversation to have, right? And it's not even like a this fall thing, the cuts happen and so forth, right? I think it's, like, the school district needs to be funded, and you need to fund it with this levy. I think that's the conversation, right? And we do the best with the funds that we have and do a fantastic job being extremely fiscally responsible within the context of what we have. I think that's all you can say.
This board has advanced what is in the best interest of this community and the school district from a long-term funding process. So that is what's currently on the table for people, given the requirement to try and find a sustainable funding mechanism, given the demographics that you all have recognized and talked about, probably ad nauseum. So I think that is important to continue to communicate that that is our goal. Our goal is to create a long-term funding process for the schools, given the limitations and the things that we've talked about, even in this meeting, with the deferred maintenance and the aging infrastructure. That is a critical conversation.
And to absolutely continue to fiscally manage the district as best possible, regardless of what the fund situation is and so forth, right? Correct. This is not, like, whether we've had a cash balance at the end of the year or not, that hasn't changed our decisions about the best way to educate kids, right? And the best way to take care of our facilities and things like that. I don't mean to be showing too much of my frustration with the status that we're in and the things we've had to do in the past, because I think, we work with the cards we're dealt with. And I think we do a pretty good job of that, and it shows up in the results that we have in the kids and so forth. So I'm confident, I'm feeling much better about this levy, right? And people's belief in the things that we say, and how we're going to take action based on what we have and so forth. So I have a pretty good vibe about this levy, but it's gonna take a lot of work on everybody's part in the community. Be a lot more numbers in the committee, or a lot more numbers making phone calls and things like that, and I'm sure that our levy committee is on top of, lessons learned from the last time around in re-communicating the message as best we can.
I think if there are any questions that are surfaced, with your constituents, please send them to my committee.
I think the levy committee has learned lessons from May, and they've also, I get the sense they realize they need to grow. So they're reaching out looking for additional help, volunteers and things, so they realize that. And I think they also, I don't know about anybody else, other conversations, but there's 50 days to election day, so I've noticed in the last week, people are saying things to me or asking me questions all of a sudden, because I think it's starting to percolate that, hey,
They're
this is
paying
a-
attention.
That they are.
Yes.
If we do have somebody who wants to volunteer, can I ask you this now? Wants to volunteer, is there a place they can, or somebody they can call?
Yeah, I'm not going to answer
Yeah,
that right
okay.
now, but
But there is. an
there
idea.
is.
Okay.
There are vehicles for.
And I can call, well, I can
Yeah.
ask. Okay.
Refer them to a levy committee member.
Yes.
Those folks will always take people.
Yeah, correct.
So, and I think that sort of outreach from the board to the community is just part of our ongoing conversation.
Okay.
Um,
Anything else?
No, we saw the evidence earlier
Yes.
of what a great school looks like, what a great school system looks like. And we will see during the levy campaign, when you peel back the expense side of things, this community and the school district does more, far more with less than any comparable school in the state of Ohio. So there's no credible claim out there that we don't spend our money wisely and prudently, which is not to say that people wouldn't take issue with where we may spend some money here or there. That's always the case. But we're very careful as we you saw in Tanya's presentation, we stretch those dollars farther than they ought to be stretched. And so people might surmise that if the levy passes, we would spend some money in certain areas, and it's, my colleagues have said, we will. You know, the surest expression of our policy here is in our budget, right? That's where you put the money behind what you want to do. And the board will do that next year during the budgeting period with whatever is available to us to budget. Whether it's, whether the levy passes or not, we'll set the budget. Just as we did this year, when we, after the levy failed in May, the board was very intentional in making cuts to get through the school year, but not minimizing, but trying to minimize as much as possible the impact of the classroom. So we made cuts in other areas, which are very impactful to our students and to our school system. And will have a detrimental effect on students in the long term, but it didn't impact the classroom. And then we imposed fees so that we wouldn't have to lay off more people. The board will go through that same very thoughtful, intentional, thorough process next time around the budget and set those same priorities. I'm confident of that, but I believe that if people look at what's accomplished here and look at what's spent here, they'll find no better value in the state of Ohio than to find American schools. So I really thank the levy committee for their hard work, their efforts, and getting that into the community and showing that information and sharing that information. And each one of us is obviously responsible for communicating that as well. And I think we all welcome that opportunity. Thank you. All right. Thomas, board reports.
Yes, indeed, I'm pleased to be representative and a school board representative on the Granville Township Pathways Committee. So a number of years ago, it must be 10 years ago or so, the village of Granville had a Pathways Committee where they created a walkability plan, right, highlighting where pathways need to be and so forth, and has been following that plan. The township now is creating a similar plan by taking the village plan initially and extending it to the borders of the township, and essentially basically helping kind of frame what our future walking and pathways system will look like. So it's been great to be a part of that. Bryn Bird is leading as a township trustee. There are a number of community members that are on the committee. And to date, we've basically taken the maps, walkability from the past, updated them with the latest changes that have been made over the last 5 or 10 years, and are suggesting potential future paths to align with the most used places in the community. Also, as a part of this, there's been a lot of work going into a survey, which has just now gone live, I believe, in which we, I hope, can help proliferate the links to that and so forth through our various school communication mechanisms. So has Bryn passed that along to you, or you?
I have not seen it yet.
Yeah, it's just gone live recently, so it's a Survey Monkey thing, which basically asks, like, do you use pathways? Do you think we have enough, too many, what areas, where are your priorities, and so forth. And that would be important to kind of get as much community feedback as we can on the survey so that we kind of prioritize where we want our pathways going. So it's great, an active committee. My expectation is it will conclude within the next couple of months after the completion of the survey, and then prioritization of results. I attended the ODOT meeting where they were talking about the bridge over 16, right? And I had a couple conversations with them about pathways there. That bridge does not include a specific pedestrian lane, but there's accommodation a little bit on the side for a little bit wider lane, specifically because the township did not have a pathways plan, right? And so it's the hope that by creating a plan, that future development, whether it be by ODOT or by other individuals or developments, can include appropriate pathways that connect our community, because it's really great. And I think there's an increasing use of the paths that we have, and it drives some tourism, and it drives a lot of great access by our residents. So it's nice that the township is on board and moves forward. And I'll let you know if there's any updates there. One other, I don't know, if there's an update, potentially the pathway to intermediate school. We'll talk about that some other time. Some things are set. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for serving in that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Any questions?
Okay. 11.01 is the contracts with the Educational Service Center of Central Ohio.
Second.
Okay, these are contracts for the teacher of the visually impaired behavior specialist. We contract with the ESCCO outside of the Lincoln County ESC for those educational services.
Maybe similar as in the past.
Yep, almost identical.
Dr. Corman,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Dees,
Aye.
Mr. Wolf,
Aye.
Mr. Jennings.
Thank you. 11.02 is a consulting contract with Amber Gilsdorf.
So moved.
Second.
So if you remember, Amber was our high school guidance counselor that left to stay home. And we had a contracting service, or contract services, service contract with her last year because we had a new, or two new people in those positions. This year, Liz Adams is pregnant, she's leaving out on maternity leave. We felt it would be in our best interest to have contracted service with Amber continuing this year so that nothing falls through the cracks, especially for students that are graduating and applying to college. So that contract is at the same level.
Is it kind of like a extended sub,
It's a,
or substitute type of position, or is it done based on time?
It's
and
done
she's-
based on
she
time.
Has deliverables relative to what's required and so forth.
that is more accurate.
Okay, good, that's perfect.
Yep.
It's great, that's fantastic.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Dees, Mr. Wolf,
Aye.
Dr. Corman,
Aye.
Mr. Jennings.
Aye.
Thank you. 11.03 is the ELL handbook.
So moved.
Second. So minimal changes. Gwen, do you want to opine? or-
The only major change in there is the state now requires us to use their screening tool to determine if students are eligible for EL services. And so that was the major change to the handbook this year, is the state's created their own screening that mirrors the test the students take in February and March to measure their progress for language acquisition. So that's the major change in the handbook this year.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Wolf,
Aye.
Dr. Corman,
Aye.
Ms. Dees, Mr. Jennings.
Aye.
Okay, the consent agenda, 12.21A through D.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, we have our typical items, obviously several donations and grants that we have received. We appreciate all of those donations to the school district. We have several of our winter sport supplemental contracts to approve. Additional substitute teachers, home instructors, a few leaves of absences, and then a couple of resignations related to supplementals, and a couple of field trips that are paid for by the students or parents.
Any questions?
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Dr. Corman,
Aye.
Ms. Dees,
Aye.
Mr. Wolf,
Aye.
Mr. Jennings.
Aye.
Okay. The monthly financial statements for August.
So moved.
Second?
We'll just take a quick look through, I'll be doing the five-year forecast presentation at the next meeting on October 8th, so a lot of the estimates in here will get finalized for the October meeting. As of this point, you can see on page 3, this is kind of a preliminary of where we're looking at October, is the overall, long-term forecast has improved a little bit. since the forecast was adopted in May. Two primary causes. One, our enrollment is up a little more than we had forecasted in May, so that's adding some revenue in and state aid, because it is actually enough to get us off the projected guarantee amount I thought we would be on next year. But between the 28 kids who showed up during the year last year, plus the growth, I'll show you a graph at the end that has that. And the other is just for some cleaning up of the estimates around other revenue, around the pay to participate, and the TIF payments from the Redwood project, which are coming in a bit higher than we had anticipated. Expenditures are pretty much online. I'll have a lot more detail on that in the October forecast. At this point, there's nothing that is causing any concern on the expenditure side of things. We're pretty much right where we would expect to be. If you look at page 6 at this point in the year, as far as our overall spending, it's pretty much in line with the last 3 years as a percentage of our total expenditures. Cash balances on page 7. We are meeting our balance in all but this coming January and the following January, which has been the pattern now for a while. You will notice at the last bar on that chart on page 7, June 2020, you'll see that the June number is very close to that cash balance number. And so if this projected out one more year, you probably see a couple additional months that are falling below our the board's adopted guideline for cash balance. Overall cash, we are actually at the high point of the year at the end of August because of property tax settlements. You can see from the prior page, we will be spending down at a fairly rapid rate over the next 5 months until property taxes start coming in again in February. The last 2 pages that are just add-ons, the enrollment. This is the current enrollment forecast. This is a little different from what I've shown you in the past in that this does include students going to CTEC and going into county units. The ones I've shown in the past have not included that. I've included that now because it gets the numbers more in line with how the forecast software works. And so I've done that. You can see from last year to this year, we have a net gain right now of 13 students. Does that sound like a lot when you consider the fact that this year's kindergarten class has 82 fewer students than last year's senior class did? So we started 82 students in the hole and still ended up plus 13, meaning we had a net migration into the district over the summer of 95 kids, which is a very high number, that higher than we have seen in prior years. I think we had originally been looking at being about flat this year on enrollment, so yeah, we're actually up a little bit right now. I assume that will continue to grow as we go through the year. That has been the historical pattern. I don't know that it will be at last year's level where we had 28 kids between October and May. But if we added another 10 or 12 kids, that would be within norms that we've seen in the past.
And this reflects like all of those are left, the down record are done left, they're gone.
Yes, everyone, at this point, that's all through the system. And then the final page, we are done with our real estate settlement. These are the collection rates, and you will see our current collection rates are very high. That both in class 1, which is residential, and agricultural, class 2, which is business. This year, this will be the 2018 collection year bar. Both of them were well over 98%, which is an excellent current collection rate. So that's a good thing, that most of our taxpayers are paying on time. Questions?
Good news, good trend.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Janine?
Aye.
And then 13.02 is the permanent appropriation for the fiscal year 18-19 school year.
Second.
Is that right?
Second.
Unfortunately, the appropriation document seems not to have made it into the packet. There's very little difference between the temporary one. The one big difference is, I had just kind of, for the operating budget, I had bumped it up a little bit initially. The permanent appropriation is actually at the same level as last year's appropriation because we are expecting to spend less in this fiscal year than we did last year. So the permanent appropriation is actually at the same level as last year, which was $29.9 million. The only other significant changes from the temporary appropriation is in all the federal funds, because at the time we did the temporary, we did not have any of our allocations for this year. And so the permanent appropriation reflects our actual allocations from the state and federal funds. Nothing else has changed other than marginally.
Questions?
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr. Miller? Aye. Mr. Janine?
Aye.
Second.
Take the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds? Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr.